ignored this warning. By encouraging and enabling the Houthis in Yemen to disrupt global shipping and launch attacks against Israel, by supporting militant groups in Syria and Iraq, which repeatedly attacked American forces engaged in the fight against ISIS, and by arming and encouraging Hezbollah after its former leader, Nasrallah, made the decision on October 7th to open a northern front against Israel. There can be no doubt Iranian support to regional proxies has directly contributed to the crisis in Gaza and Lebanon. At the center of Iran's efforts since October 7th to sow chaos and threaten regional stability is the IRGC, which has repeatedly flouted and violated this Council's resolutions. I can't believe I have to say this, but I will, because the IRGC and its allies are out there peddling propaganda. The decision to launch nearly 200 ballistic missiles at Israel was not in any way defensive. The IRGC was not protecting Iran from threats from another member state. Instead, the IRGC was acting in solidarity with Hezbollah after the killing of Nasrallah, who led a terrorist group that has the blood of thousands of Americans, Lebanese, and Israelis on its hands. I can think of no starker example of state support of terrorism than launching ballistic missiles to avenge the death of a terrorist leader. It is indefensible and it is unacceptable. And we have a collective responsibility as members of the Security Council to impose additional sanctions on the IRGC for supporting terrorism and for flaunting so many of this Council's resolutions. If this Council sits on its hands, what message will that send? I fear that silence and inaction will only invite the IRGC to repeat attacks like what we saw yesterday and on April 13th of this year, again and again and again. Colleagues, we meet at a moment when there is a heightened risk of countries in the region being dragged into a broader conflict. This includes Lebanon. The intensified fighting over the last week has displaced nearly 1 million people, and we mourn the many civilians who've been killed. We also recognize that for nearly a year, Israel has repeatedly called for the full implementation of Resolution 1701, even as Hezbollah's attacks along the Israeli-Lebanese border have displaced Lebanese people. And even as Hezbollah has blocked Lebanon's government from exercising full sovereignty on its side of the blue line, it is significant that even in the aftermath of recent events, Israel is still calling for the full implementation of Resolution 1701. Achieving this outcome through the hard work of diplomacy remains the United States' urgent priority. We strongly believe that a diplomatic solution along the blue line, consistent with Resolution 1701, offers the only path to durably de-escalate tensions and allow Israeli and Lebanese citizens to return to their homes with safety and security. As we pursue this diplomatic solution, we reiterate our call on all parties to protect civilians. We also underscore our support for UNIFIL and emphasize that all parties must ensure UNIFIL personnel remain secure. Colleagues, we are also committed to doing everything possible to end the war in Gaza, where Palestinian civilians have been caught in the crosshairs of war, where a dire humanitarian crisis persists. That's why we're working to bring about a ceasefire deal with release of hostages, consistent with Resolution 2735. The events of the past week should send an unambiguous message to Hamas's leadership, which continues to cower in tunnels beneath Gaza. Hezbollah and Iran will not rescue you. The only path forward is a ceasefire agreement. We must double down on diplomatic solutions that would ensure the safety of people across the region. As we do, there should be no doubt The United States will continue to support Israel's right to defend itself against Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and any other Iranian-supported terrorists. Of course, how Israel defends itself matters. We continue to make clear that measures must be taken to minimize civilian harm. Colleagues, as President Biden emphasized following yesterday's attack, the United States is fully supportive of Israel. Our actions have been defensive in nature. Let me be clear. The Iranian regime will be held responsible for its actions, and we strongly warn against Iran or its proxies taking actions against the United States or further actions against Israel. Colleagues, this moment of great risk is a test of this Council. It is imperative that we unequivocally condemn Iran's attack and demand that it cease its support for terrorism in the region. People in Israel, in Gaza, and the West Bank, in Lebanon, and across the region deserve a durable peace, and it is far past time for this Council to hold Iran accountable for fanning the flames of war. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United States. I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank Slovenia for their able leadership as President of the Council during the month of September. Let me also take this opportunity to congratulate you, Madam President, for assuming the presidency for October. I express my deep gratitude to the Secretary General for his briefing today and his tireless efforts for peace in the Middle East. This is a moment of reckoning for the Security Council. Resolution 1701 has been violated by all parties on the ground. A broader regional war with the potential to devastate not just Lebanon and the region, but far beyond, is dangerously knocking on our door. Our repeated calls for urgent restraint have been ignored. Both the regional stability and the credibility of this Council are now in jeopardy. Let there be no misunderstanding. It was Hamas' brutal attacks in broad daylight that set this escalation in motion. However, neither October 7th nor the ensuing response give any actor the right to violate the international norms and institutions that the United Nations and the global community have built over decades, including international humanitarian law, Security Council resolutions, and the sovereignty and territorial integrity stipulated under the UN Charter. The Security Council, which bears the primary responsibility for maintaining international peace and security, must unite and act. This is not like any other situation. This conflict has the potential to broaden and deepen, involving many countries, without clear limitations in geography, and with far-reaching implications on international politics, economics, and even humanity as a whole. This demands more than passive condemnation. The Security Council must do something significant now to prevent the situation from plunging deeper into the abyss. The very raison d'etre of the Security Council is at stake here. Indeed, now is the time for the Security Council to draw a firm line in the sand. No actor should be given a green light of impunity or a blank check to operate far beyond the rule of law. We cannot afford to be paralyzed by frustration or helplessness. Colleagues, let me conclude by fully echoing the statement made by the Secretary General yesterday. And I quote, "I condemn the broadening of the Middle East conflict with escalation after escalation. This must stop. We absolutely need a ceasefire," unquote. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea, and I now invite the representative of Slovenia to take the floor.
Allow me, on behalf of Ambassador Boger and our entire team, to thank you sincerely, and other members for your kind words, and also to wish to congratulate you and your team for assuming the presidency of the Council for October. Wish you all the best. We thank the Secretary General for his briefing. Madam President, in the last 2 weeks, we have met several times to discuss the situation in the Middle East. It has become increasingly clear that the current escalation is gaining its own, even more dangerous momentum. The actions and reactions of actors involved are dragging the region further away from peace and closer to an all-out war. No single party can absolve itself of blame for the chaos that is unfolding. This has become a crisis of retaliation and vengeance, where each strike fuels the next. Let me be clear, the region needs full and immediate de-escalation. For this to happen, a ceasefire on all fronts is urgent. We condemn the recent escalation in the Middle East. This includes Iranian attack on Israel. It includes Israeli attacks on Lebanon and the escalation between Hezbollah and Israel. We call on Israel to revoke the ground operation in southern Lebanon. It also includes continuous Israeli military operation in Gaza, and it includes yesterday's terror attack in Jaffa. We see deeply troublesome parallels. Escalation from any side only leads to further violence, not security or peace. We want to underline more violence cannot bring more stability and security in the region or beyond. War is not a solution to the problems in the Middle East. There is no military solution to the crisis. We call on all countries and actors to show restraint, and to everyone with influence must exert it. To Israel, Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis and others, the circle of violence must stop. Retaliations must stop. Escalations must stop. We call on all parties to respect international law, particularly international humanitarian human rights law. Respect for and compliance with international law are a must. Protection of civilians must be ensured at all times, and we are dismayed by the impact of the escalation in Lebanon on civilians and condemn the high number of civilian casualties. Massive displacement in Lebanon will add an additional strain on a country which is already facing numerous challenges. Equally, this intensification of the conflict will not bring thousands of displaced Israelis back to their homes. And we must not forget about the entire population of Gaza being displaced repeatedly. There is a dire need to recommit and fully implement Resolution 1701. This Council must stand united in its call for de-escalation and ceasefire. We repeat our call for safety and security of UNIFIL to be ensured at all times. We also take this opportunity to express our full support to the work of the United Nations and the Secretary General in this crisis. We appeal to Israel to reconsider today's announcement. It is high time to strengthen the role of diplomacy and to prioritize peace. We support all initiatives which could bring stability about peace. Ceasefire negotiations related to Lebanon and to Gaza are utmost needed. We underline this Council has primary responsibility for maintenance of international peace and security. The region is standing at a precipice. We are a step away from an all-out war that threatens not only the region, but global peace and stability. In the complex history of the Middle East, the Council has made various attempts to shoulder its responsibility. It is now on us, these 15 countries sitting by this table, to unite and call out for an all-out ceasefire. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Slovenia. I now invite the representative of Algeria to take the floor.
Madam President, I would like to commend Slovenia for their remarkable presidency of the Council during last month. And I also congratulate Switzerland for assuming the presidency for this month and assure them of Algeria's full support. I extend my sincere gratitude to Mr. Antonio Guterres for his comprehensive briefing. And I express Algeria's full solidarity admiration and support for the Secretary General following the incredible decision of the Israeli occupying authorities to declare him persona non grata. This decision reflects a clear disdain of the UN system and the entire international community. For the Israeli authorities, no narrative, no truth exists except their own. Madam President, this meeting marks the third time in a single week that we have heard from the Secretary General regarding the Middle East. It is a testimony of the gravity of the situation. We stand perilously close to a regional conflagration, with tensions escalating daily. The situation has further deteriorated due to the Israeli aggression against Lebanon, beginning with the targeting of civilian electronic devices and progressing to indiscriminate bombardment and ground invasion that shows a blatant disregard for human life, a flagrant violation of international humanitarian law. Following the attacks detonating civilian electronic devices, the Security Council convened at Algeria's request. We endeavored to have the Council send and clear a simple message, a call for immediate desescalation, a call for immediate desescalation. Regrettably, the Council failed in this attempt. Madam President, the Security Council's inability to act has exacted a devastating bill, a devastating toll. Between September 17 and 25th, the Israeli militaries claimed more than 1,000 lives in Lebanon. 1,000 lives in Lebanon, including 87 children and 156 women, while displacing 1 million of Lebanese in the country's largest exodus. Our inaction has effectively granted Israel under the right of self-defense principle. Our inaction has effectively granted Israel carte blanche to continue its rampage in Gaza, in West Bank, carte blanche to escalate against Lebanon and pursue the bloody agenda of death and destruction. Now we hear the new rhetorics of desescalation through escalation. Strange. This is a dangerous fallacy. Escalation inevitably breeds further escalation for years to come. This surge in violence has derailed efforts to implement Resolution 2735 and has severely compromised any prospect for calm in Lebanon and the wider region. The Security Council must act with greater resolve to be relevant, simply to be credible. As the highest authority responsible for maintaining international peace and security, it is unacceptable for its decision, including Resolution 2735, to be blatantly disregarded. Israel is not above the law, and we must hold it accountable. We need solutions, tangible, enforceable solutions. No more rhetorics that serves no one. Madam President, while we must not allow the escalation in Lebanon to overshadow the ongoing tragedy in Gaza, it seems some have grown indifferent of Gaza's people plight. Any effort to address the broader escalation in the region must begin with halting the brutal assault in Gaza. I repeat, any effort to address the broader escalation in the region must begin with halting the brutal assault in Gaza. We need an immediate ceasefire. We need an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Everyone, save for the Israeli occupier, seeks this end, this cycle of violence, and is working toward that end. So how long will the international community remain impotent in the face of Israel's defiance? How long will we fail to enforce full implementation of Resolution 1701, especially Israel's withdrawal from Lebanese territory, a key condition for Lebanon's stability? Madam President, the Middle East urgently requires concerted actions from all of us, to find lasting, sustainable solution to its crisis. These solutions demand an end to Israeli occupation of Arab lands in Lebanon, in Syria, and the establishment of an independent Palestinian state with Al-Quds Sharif as its capital. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Algeria. I now give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Madam President, allow me first to congratulate Switzerland on assuming the presidency of the Security Council in this very challenging month of October. We pledge our full support. We also thank Slovenia for its successful presidency in the month of September. We are grateful to His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, United Nations Secretary General, for his insights on this deeply concerning matter. Madam President, the Middle East remains a region of intense and complex geopolitical dynamics, shaped by historical legacies, power struggles, and intricate relationship among various states and non-state actors, significantly shaping the region's landscape. The Palestine question, a central and profoundly impactful issue, continues to influence diplomatic relations and strategic interests not only within the region but also globally. The ongoing conflict and the quest for a two-state solution continue to be pivotal in discussion about peace and stability in the Middle East. Amidst the ongoing Israel strikes in Gaza, Beirut, and beyond, Iran has recently launched ballistic missiles into Israel, marking a sharp escalation in regional tensions. This action is reportedly in retaliation for the recent killing of Hezbollah and Hamas leaders by Israel airstrikes. These military acts further exacerbate the prevailing regional tensions and may indeed trigger more conflicts involving other countries with potentially unthinkable implications. In this context, we recall that during the 79th General Assembly debate, world leaders expressed deep concern over the escalating conflict in Gaza and its potential spillover to Lebanon. Both the UN Secretary General and the President of the General Assembly urged Israel to cease hostilities and pursue a diplomatic resolution to prevent Lebanon from becoming another conflict zone like Gaza. Madam President, precisely 6 months ago in this chamber, we raised serious concerns that ongoing retaliatory attacks between Israel and Iran could significantly escalate regional tensions and potentially lead to a full-blown conflict between Israel and Iran. Regrettably, this is now fast becoming a sad reality. These retaliatory attacks are shaping the foreign policies and security strategies of regional states and their external allies. While recognizing the right of states to self-defense as enshrined in the UN Charter, we express our deep concern on the recent Iranian strikes. In light of the prevailing situation, it is imperative that all parties involved, including Israel and Iran, strictly adhere to international legal norms to prevent further military confrontation and maintain regional stability. All involved parties need to exercise restraint and approach the situation with wisdom and prudence. The Council must continue to closely monitor the situation and take appropriate action to deter additional threats while safeguarding international peace and security. Furthermore, the Council must actively engage all concerned parties to prevent any miscalculations that could lead to broader conflict in an already volatile region. Such escalation would have devastating consequences for civilians who are already suffering in the occupied Palestinian territory, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Israel, and the broader Middle East. Indeed, we should not forget the human cost of this deepening conflict. The prevailing situation is a matter of great concern and demands our profound reflection and immediate action, as it represents one of the most severe humanitarian crises of our time. With each escalation, the conflict generates more casualties, displacement, and destruction of infrastructure. exacerbating the unimaginable human tragedy in the war conflict zones. Seeking a sustainable solution in the Middle East region is of paramount importance. Stability in the Middle East is vital for the security and development of all the states in the region, including Iran and Israel. We therefore reiterate our consistent appeal to the Council members to redouble their efforts and influence towards this noble goal in full compliance with all relevant international norms, including resolution, decisions, and other instruments of the United Nations. Let us strive for peace, understanding, and cooperation in the Middle East, mindful of the fact that acknowledging the legitimate concerns of all involved parties is a crucial step towards fostering stability, harmony in diversity. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Mozambique, and I give the floor to the representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Madam President, and allow me to congratulate Switzerland on the assumption of the presidency and to thank Slovenia for their successful presidency. I also thank Secretary General for his sobering briefing on the urgent and rapidly deteriorating situation in the Middle East, including Lebanon, and express Guyana's full support to him, including for his untiring efforts. Madam President, the situation in the Middle East is barreling towards a greater catastrophe. Israel continues to expand its military operations to Lebanon while continuing its intense offensive in Gaza. And we are now witnessing a dangerous escalation of attacks between Israel and Iran. Amidst the deadly tit-for-tat, tensions continue to ratchet up on multiple fronts, and the entire region ticks as a virtual time bomb before our very eyes. Guyana urges all parties to step back and to immediately end all hostilities. This Council must act as one on the side of peace and respect for international law and the United Nations Charter. We must work to de-escalate the situation, and civilians must be protected on all fronts at all times. Madam President, when we met last week to discuss Lebanon, it was clear to every member of this Council that disastrous consequences could ensue from a wider armed conflict in that country. Today, we are meeting amidst reports of ground incursions by Israel into the sovereign territory of Lebanon in violation of the UN Charter and Resolution 1701, and following aerial bombardments from southern Lebanon to the heart of Beirut, resulting in more than 1,000 deaths in the past 2 weeks alone, not to mention the thousands injured and displaced. Guyana calls on Israel to uphold their obligations under the UN Charter and the wider body of international law, including international humanitarian law. Madam President, the people of Lebanon should be spared from the throes of a war neither of their making nor choosing, even as the country continues to grapple with difficult economic and political circumstances. This Council must act in the interest of international peace and security to prevent further tragedy in Lebanon, Gaza, and throughout the Middle East. Allow me to conclude with 3 urgent appeals. First, Guyana reiterates its call to all parties to immediately cease the hostilities and to abide by their obligations under international humanitarian law, in particular, the protection of civilians. We must intensify our efforts for a ceasefire in Gaza, in Lebanon, and every other front of operations. This Council must use all of its available tools to contribute to a diplomatic solution and to the full implementation of Resolution 1701, which provides a clear path for resolving this conflict in a manner that ensures that peace and security can be enjoyed by the people of both Lebanon and Israel. Second, we appeal to all parties to guarantee the safety and security of all UN and humanitarian personnel, including those attached to UNIFIL. As is the case with all UN personnel, UNIFIL has operated under extremely difficult circumstances over the past year and is undoubtedly being placed in a position of much greater risk as hostilities heightened in their area of operations. We must work to ensure that conditions remain conducive for the exercise by UNIFIL of its important mandate. Third, Guyana appeals for a renewed investment in peace over aggression. Let us enable the former at the expense of the latter, as we strive to save the present generation from the continuing scourge of war. As Council members, let us act together in favor of the millions of civilians who are paying the heaviest price in these senseless wars. Justice and peace demand that we do no less. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana, and I invite the representative of Japan to take the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. First of all, let me express our gratitude to Slovenia for their successful presidency in September, and congratulate Madam President on your assumption of the presidency for October, and we express our full support to your presidency. I also would like to thank Secretary General for his sobering and important briefing today. Since last October, the world has witnessed an unconscionable spiral of violence in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, and beyond. The recent developments in Lebanon are particularly worrying. We are seriously concerned about the ground operation conducted by Israel Defense Forces in Lebanon. We cannot tolerate any further escalation. In this vein, Japan once again calls for an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. All parties need to demonstrate their recommitment to the full implementation of relevant UN Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 1701. Japan pays respect to the UN staff and personnel on the ground, devoting the high cause under the severe circumstances. Their security must be ensured. Now we are seeing the growing needs of the civilians in Lebanon who are facing the onset of a displacement crisis. Thus, Japan reiterates its call on all parties to immediately take all measures to prevent any further civilian casualties and adhere to international law, including international humanitarian law, to prioritize the protection of civilians and ensure humanitarian access. Madam President, the escalation in Lebanon will drag the Middle East into a wider conflict, as was seen yesterday. Japan is deeply concerned about the attacks conducted by Iran using ballistic missiles against Israel. These attacks further deteriorate the current situation in the Middle East. We strongly condemn such an escalation. Secretary General issued a statement that condemned the broadening of the Middle East conflict, and we reiterate his call for immediate ceasefire. In April, when this council was convened following Iran's large-scale attack against Israel, many of us stand that it constitutes an unprecedented development. However, we have seen what was unprecedented occurring twice within the last 6 months. This clearly shows the Middle East is following a dangerous path that could lead to a catastrophe. We must not let this happen. In this regard, Japan amplified our call to all parties to exercise maximum restraint, work towards de-escalation, protect civilians, and work through dialogue and diplomacy towards peace. Neither the region nor the world can afford any more conflicts. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Japan, and I invite the representative of the Russian Federation to take the floor.
Madam President, We would like to congratulate Slovenia with its successful conclusion of the presidency in September, which was not an easy month. And we'd like to congratulate Switzerland with assuming the presidency. We thank the Secretary General for his assessment of the situation in the Middle East, which has become severely exacerbated by an unprecedented spiral of violence in Lebanon and the broadening of confrontation to neighbors in the region. We also took account of the positions by Israel and Iran contained in the letters disseminated yesterday. Unfortunately, the Middle Eastern region, in front of our eyes, is sliding towards a new large-scale war, whereas the Security Council is just there helplessly watching it. The Israeli brutal military operation in Gaza continues despite the demand on the part of the overwhelming part of the international community to stop it. The spiraling of violence predictably led to a worsening situation on the border between Israel, Lebanon, and Yemen, and in the Red Sea. But instead of using diplomacy, the West Jerusalem authorities unambiguously staked everything on using force. And their American accomplices are playing completely into their hands. They are paralyzing the deliberations of the Security Council. As a result, the new victim of the Israeli military machine is Lebanon. After intensive shelling of Lebanese towns, the southern neighbor started a ground operation in Lebanon. Furthermore, after a series of political killings, including the killing of the Hamas chair of the Political Bureau, Haniyeh, the General Secretary of Hassan Nasrallah and other leaders of resistant movements, Iran came into the confrontation. Iran, who for 2 whole months had been showing exceptional, under the circumstances, restraint. From the statements made by our Western colleagues, we drew the conclusion that the only issue that the Security Council has in front of it is a response to a missile strike by Iran. It's difficult to imagine what kind of role the diplomatic process would play when the situation is viewed this way. And it's presented as though all of this happened in a vacuum, as though nothing is happening, and nothing did happen in Lebanon, in Gaza, in Syria, in Yemen. But it did happen, and it led to a new, very dangerous spiral of a widening Middle East conflict. Russia resolutely condemns the attack on Lebanon and calls on Israeli authorities to immediately stop using force and withdraw their troops from the Lebanese territory. There is no justification for fresh civilian victims amongst the civilians, and their number is already in the thousands. We express our solidarity with the leadership and the people of the friendly country of Lebanon who are undergoing an armed aggression, and we will send our heartfelt condolences to the families of those who died. We demand a full comprehensive implementation of Resolution 1701. It contains the obligations on Israel to end all the offensive military operations, to withdraw their military from southern Lebanon, and end the occupation of Lebanese territories, as well as the obligations on Hezbollah to withdraw the units north of the Litani River. The Israeli side has to ensure rigorously the safety of the interim forces in Lebanon, who are undergoing unpredictable risks because of the Israeli incursion. We'd like to recall that the threats to the health and life of blue helmets could amount to a war crime. We also decisively condemn the killing of Nasrallah. We reject the fact that in order to eliminate him, a residential quarter in Lebanon's capital had 80 bombs weighing 1 ton dropped on it. As a result, 6 high-rise buildings were destroyed. How can you call this a discriminatory selective action here? This political elimination is fraught with catastrophic consequences for Lebanon and the Middle East as a whole. Western Jerusalem, I'm sure, understood that, but they intentionally decided to go ahead and do this. And this means that the Israeli side shoulders the full responsibility for the subsequent escalation and its consequences, including the consequences for the people of Israel. Within the framework of its mandate to maintain international peace and security, the Security Council has to make Israel immediately end the hostilities. And we all have the duty to make every effort to create the conditions for the political and diplomatic settlement. In this context, we note the signals sent by Tehran that do not wish to see a further spiral of confrontation. Madam President, the Security Council in the recent days is being frequently and seemingly correctly criticized because of its inability to end violence in the area of Israeli-Palestinian conflict. At the same time, those who follow our work knows very well that 14 out of 15 members of the Security Council would have undertaken the measures to compel parties to peace, would have saved this way the lives of thousands innocent women, children, and the elderly. And Israel would not have been able to act as brazenly and with such disregard to international law if they didn't feel themselves under an unequivocal and all-around protection by the United States. For their ally in the Middle East, Washington has already used the veto in Security Council 5, and since the beginning of June has intentionally been trying to pull the wool over our eyes, advertising their so-called Biden plan and its quiet diplomacy to arrive at a deal between Hamas and Israel. To be perfectly honest with you, we are left with the impression by all of this that these mediated negotiations are something that Washington is conducting with itself. And it is very symbolic here, therefore, that the approval to eliminate Hezbollah and start a very dangerous spiral of regional escalation was given by the Israeli Prime Minister from New York after he delivered an openly militaristic statement in the General Assembly. This is the kind of a well-tuned duet, distinguished colleagues, we have to deal with. And the question, of course, is not in the moral and political support, but also it has to do with the multi-billion supplies of weapons that Washington continues supplying to Israel, despite the fact that it's used to annihilate 42,000 Palestinians. Israel, which of course doesn't need any kind of mediation, and continues its brutal campaign. As a result of this, the flame of this conflict is growing wider and wider, and it's bringing in newer and newer neighbors of Israel in the region. The dangerous illusion here is that this flame will leave Israel unscathed. This flame has already consumed the lives of remaining Israeli hostages, whereas Western Jerusalem is pretending that all of this is part of their plan, and at the same time showing complete disregard to the public opinion in Israel itself. Madam President, another dangerous illusion is that Israel, having a considerable military supremacy, plans to deal with the crises they provoked on themselves. It is becoming increasingly clear that the plans of the Israeli leadership is to pay any price so as to trigger a conflict between their main regional adversary, Iran, and the United States. It's difficult to say whether Washington understands this, but so far this show has been going on following the Israeli script. And if it reaches its finale, the conflict can reach an unimaginable level of escalation and will threaten not just the Middle East, but the entire world. We are convinced that it is in our interest to prevent such a scenario. We would like to believe that our American colleagues will also finally see the light and will fully realize their responsibility they shoulder as permanent members of the Security Council. Madam President, the only way out of the situation in the Middle East we see as using all of the vast toolkits the Security Council has. This toolkit allows us to effectively achieve an end of conflicts and ensuring that Security Council resolutions are implemented. Any other initiatives will just be a mitigating stopgap and will not be effective. We see no alternative to making parties to the conflict to immediately have a ceasefire in Gaza, which is to be accompanied by an exchange of hostages and prisoners and organizing a full and unimpeded humanitarian access in the Strip. This can help set the foundation for the relaunching of a peace settlement of the Palestinian issues on the international basis, which is itself based on the principle of two states, and this is something that we have always always spoken in favor of. The second area of our efforts is also obvious. It's an immediate ceasefire in the south of Lebanon and a general rejection by any direct or indirect participants in the conflict from using force provocations and hateful rhetoric. Madam President, today's news that the Secretary General is a persona non grata in Israel is unheard of and is a slap not just on the UN but on all of us. We call on the members of the Security Council and the UN to react to this outrageous act. And I repeat once again, in order to deal with all of these issues, we at the Security Council have the tools. What it's at issue here is having the political will. We have the will. Do you? We urge you all to answer this question as soon as possible. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation, and I give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Madam President, the Security Council has been convened in the most difficult of circumstances concerning the Middle East. Allow me, however, to congratulate you and Switzerland on assuming the presidency of the Council and assure you of Sierra Leone's fullest support and cooperation. Similarly, we congratulate and commend Slovenia on their efficient and excellent stewardship of the Council in the critical month of September. I also thank His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, for his important briefing on a tragically escalating situation. Mr. Secretary General, be assured of Sierra Leone's fullest support, always. Madam President, colleagues, Sierra Leone is gravely concerned about the dangerous cycle of escalation in the Middle East, characterized by spiraling tit-for-tat, ping-pong retaliatory attacks, not in conformity with the United Nations Charter, including the application of its Article 51, that can only lead to a mutually assured destruction if there is no immediate de-escalation. Despite the resonance and resolute call for ceasefire by our leaders in the general debate of the 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly, and repeated calls by members of this Council for ceasefire and restraint, it must be clear to all that we now have a regional conflict with multiple fronts in Gaza and violence in the West Bank, in Lebanon, where its sovereignty and territorial integrity is being violated, retaliatory attacks between Israel and Iran, as well as with the Houthis in Yemen. Since the 7th October 2023 heinous attacks led by Hamas on Israeli civilians, which we have condemned as acts of terror, we are gravely concerned about the escalation of violence that has ensued. In Gaza, the response by Israel has been characterized by collective punishment, widespread bombardment, and alarming disregard for international humanitarian law, leading to immense civilian suffering and the destruction of critical civilian infrastructure. Only hours ago, it has been reported that 50 people were killed in southern Gaza, only a few hours ago. Gaza cannot be forgotten, as the rate and pace of killings have not subsided, with over 41,000 people killed, and the Security Council Resolution 2735 all but forgotten. The protection of civilians must remain our top priority. Sierra Leone is deeply disturbed by reports of disproportionate military responses, the targeting of civilian infrastructure, and the collective punishment of the population in Gaza. We urge all parties to respect the principles of distinction, proportionality, and necessity as enshrined in international humanitarian law. There can be no justification for the deliberate targeting of civilians or the destruction of civilian infrastructure that people rely for their survival. We continue to call for unhindered humanitarian access to Gaza. The blockade and siege has left civilians in desperate need of food, water, medical supplies, and basic services. Humanitarian access, safety, and aid must be allowed to flow to those who are suffering. Madam President, recent events, including strikes in Lebanon, the killing of a Hezbollah leader, and the reported land incursion by Israel, are deeply concerning. These developments have heightened the risk of regional destabilization, and we call on all actors to show restraint, avoid further escalation, and recommit to dialogue and compliance with Security Council Resolution 1701. We urge the parties to comply with their obligations regarding UNIFIL and the protection of UN peacekeepers and UN premises. It is clear that today, Israel and Hezbollah are at war. Sierra Leone has been concerned about the repeated exchanges of fire across the blue line since Hezbollah launched rockets into Israel on 8 October 2023, unprovoked. While the exchanges of fire were largely confined to the immediate vicinity of the blue line for a short period, we observed the gradual intensification along and increasing well beyond the blue line, causing civilian casualties and infrastructure damage, destruction of farmlands, and displacement of tens of thousands of civilians. Members of this council, including Sierra Leone, have been expressing the risk of the danger of miscalculation, a wider and devastating regional conflagration as a consequence of the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Today, Middle East is at war. We note the declaration of Israel to return displaced residents and further declaration of Hezbollah on a ceasefire in Gaza. We express deep concerns over the dangerous rhetoric relating to the achievement of respective military objectives by the conflicting parties. In this regard, Sierra Leone reiterates that military action is not the best course of action to achieve the stated objectives of the parties. Sierra Leone therefore calls on the parties to use diplomatic channels, including United Nations good offices, to avoid further escalation and risking a war that will include actors outside of the region. This Council must now stand united in calling for full implementation of all relevant Security Council resolutions, including Resolution 1701 and 1559. All sides must agree to a ceasefire as a precursor to the resettlement of displaced residents in the south of Lebanon and in the north of Israel peacefully. Madam President, a letter dated 1st October 2024 from the Permanent Representative of Iran to the United Nations addressed to the President of the Security Council confirms what we all witness as reported by global news media, to the effect that, and I quote, the armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran carried out a series of missile attacks against the military and security target of, end of quote, the State of Israel. The leadership of Israel has vowed to further retaliate. Sierra Leone condemns all attacks that violate international law and the UN Charter, including, as aforesaid, the blatant misapplication of Article 51. We join the UN Secretary General in condemning, and I quote, the broadening of the Middle East conflict with escalation after escalation. This must stop. We absolutely need a ceasefire, end of quote. The path to peace cannot be paved with violence. A sustainable solution can only be achieved through genuine dialogue and diplomacy, addressing the legitimate rights and concerns of the conflicting parties, most particularly the aspirations of both the Palestinian and Israeli people. This includes the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and the right of Israel to security within its recognized borders. In conclusion, Madam President, Sierra Leone continues to call for the parties to consider the global implications of their actions and to recommit to a cessation of hostilities. We urge the Security Council, our Council, to act decisively to halt the violence, enforce a ceasefire, the release of hostages and prisoners, facilitation of access to humanitarian aid, ensure accountability, and work towards a just and lasting solution that respects the rights of all peoples. Let us end the occupation of Palestine, as the International Court of Justice has called for, implement the two-state solution, and choose a future of peace, stability, and dignity for both Palestine and Israel. Sierra Leone stands firm in its commitment to peace, justice, and international law. I thank you.
Je remercie le représentant de la Sierra Leone.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone, and I invite the representative of China to take the floor.
President, I congratulate Switzerland on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for this month, and I thank Slovenia for its work as the presidency of last month. I thank France for requesting this emergency meeting. I also thank Secretary General Guterres for his briefing. On this occasion, I would like to reiterate China's resolute support for the SG for his work and oppose the groundless accusations of Israel against him. President, over the past 2 weeks, the situation in the Middle East, in particular in Lebanon, has taken a sharp turn for the worse. Following the remotely operated and simultaneous detonation of thousands of communications devices in Lebanon, Israel carried out several rounds of large-scale airstrikes in southern and eastern Lebanon. Yesterday, Israel launched ground offensive and military incursion into Lebanon. Israel also launched intensive airstrikes against Syria. Iran has also concluded a series of military attacks on the military and security targets in Israel and sent correspondence to the Security Council explaining its position. China is deeply concerned and extremely worried about the current grave situation and the prospect for further developments. We call for effective respect for the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of all states. We reiterate our opposition to all acts that violate the basic norms of international relations and condemn all violence and attacks against civilians. We share the position of the United Nations that any Israeli crossing into Lebanon violates the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Lebanon and contravenes the provisions of the Security Council Resolution 1701. Since last October, the cycle of violent conflict has been repeating itself in the Middle East. Israel, in total disregard for the call of the international community for an immediate ceasefire, single-mindedly advances its military operations, resulting in the projection and expansion of the conflict. At present, an all-out war is on the verge of breaking out. At this critical juncture, any inflammatory statements and provocative actions are extremely dangerous and could easily lead to miscalculations and chain reactions, escalate the situation, or even make it completely out of control. We urge all parties, in particular Israel, to exercise restraint and refrain from any action that could lead to further escalation of the situation. President, the conflict has caused an unprecedented humanitarian disaster. As we have seen, Gaza has become an inferno on earth, while in Lebanon there has been a great deal of destruction of civilian facilities, thousands of casualties, and more than 1 million people displaced from their homes, including a large number of Palestinian refugees. We call on all parties to the conflict to respect the red lines of international humanitarian law and to protect civilians. We support the efforts of the UN humanitarian system to take urgent action to ease the humanitarian situation in Palestine and Lebanon. China reiterates the importance of respecting the neutrality of UNIFIL and of effectively ensuring the safety and security of the peacekeepers. United Nations assets and personnel should not be the target of armed attacks. President, the Security Council bears an important responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. Under the current circumstances, the Council must act urgently and be united in making demands clearly and unequivocally that An immediate ceasefire must be established in Gaza. The de-escalation of the violence must be stopped, and the de-escalation of the Lebanese and Israeli situation must be advanced. The cycle of violence must be halted. Every effort must be made to prevent the spread of the fighting, and the parties concerned must be pushed to return to the track of political and diplomatic solutions. Any rhetorics that appease and allow further military adventurism will send out wrong signals and may cause serious consequences. We hope that major countries with important influence will adopt a sincere and responsible attitude and earnestly play a more constructive role and avoid further turmoil of the situation. I thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China, and I give the floor to the representative of Ecuador. Thank you, Madam President. Allow me first and foremost to congratulate your delegation on assuming the presidency of the Council for this month, and I reiterate the full support of my country. We'd also like to thank Slovenia for the excellent presidency of the Council last month. I'd like to stress and reiterate the support of my country to the work of the Secretary-General for peace and our support for all UN agencies in that regard. So thank you, Madam President, and I'd like to thank France for having requested this emergency meeting so that the Council can consider the worsening situation in Lebanon and Israel, recent developments that have placed the Middle East in an extremely vulnerable situation. Thank you, Secretary-General, for the sobering information that you have provided us with and your call to the international community to mobilize the more than $400 million in humanitarian assistance that Lebanon requires at this time, and above all, for your permanent commitment to a de-escalation of the conflict and a ceasefire. We should begin by recalling that we are just 5 days away from the anniversary of the terrorist attacks by Hamas, which have no justification and must be condemned, that gave rise to the current spiral of violence that we're seeing in the region. The Palestinian cause cannot be used by Hezbollah and other extremist groups to try to, in vain, explain their acts of terrorism, such as the killing of children while they were playing football in Mahd al-Shams last July. Ecuador recognizes the imminent right to self-defense of member states of the United Nations in case of an armed attack in terms outlined in Article 51 of the Charter. We must put an end to the escalation of violence that has been described, which includes air bombings and incursions, the launching of rockets, ballistic missiles, acts of terrorism that continue to expose innocent civilians to loss of life and limb. In Gaza, we've seen tens of thousands of civilian deaths, including women and children. The states involved, international humanitarian law must be respected. Humanitarian workers must be able to fulfill their work, and their lives must be respected. The states involved and regional organizations and the international community as a whole must deploy all diplomatic and political strategies possible to bring about a cessation of hostilities. This responsibility is greater for those that have a greater degree of influence over the parties to the conflict. Now is the time to take specific decisions aimed at achieving agreements that will lead to a lasting and sustainable peace. Resolutions 1701, 1559, 2722 and 2735 of the Security Council must be complied with without delay, since non-compliance constitutes a violation of international law. We must avoid another humanitarian disaster, leaving those who desire more violence without any excuse. Madam President, colleagues, Ortega and Gasset said, "It is false to say that in life circumstances decide. On the contrary, circumstances are the dilemma in the face of which we must make decisions. Who takes the decision is our character. Neither our collective responsibility in the Council nor peace, which constitutes a high value of humanity, can be subordinated to geopolitical tensions and interests. In conclusion, I reiterate that Ecuador supports all initiatives which have as their goal the restoration of peace and the sustainability of that peace. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ecuador. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as a representative of Switzerland. We would like to thank the Secretary General for his statement. Switzerland is extremely concerned about the recent developments in the Middle East. The risk of a regional war that we have been warning of for almost a year now is about to become a reality. In view of the countless civilian lives at risk, it is imperative that all actors in the region immediately cease hostilities to allow for de-escalation and that the Council fully plays its role. The intensification of hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah, including reports of Israeli ground incursions and the firing of some 200 ballistic missiles by Iran into Israeli territory, are unacceptable. The same applies to the offensives carried out by the Houthis and other armed groups in the region. All these attacks must stop immediately. Switzerland condemns this violence in the recent weeks. It is endangering the lives of civilians throughout the region. Tens of thousands of civilians have been killed, including countless children. Several million have been forcibly displaced because of the hostilities. The civilian population is paying a heavy price for this military escalation in Lebanon, throughout the occupied Palestinian territory, and in Israel. Dialogue is the only way to avoid a regional war. Switzerland supports all efforts to find diplomatic solutions leading to an immediate end to the violence throughout the region. All parties and those who have influence over them must now show maximum restraint. Switzerland calls on all parties to act within the limits imposed by international law, including the United Nations Charter. The sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries in the region must be respected. In addition, the will of this Council is clear. All of its resolutions must be implemented. This applies to the resolutions demanding a ceasefire in Gaza and calling for the immediate and unconditional release of the hostages. It also applies to the resolutions on the maritime security in the Red Sea. Similarly, we once again urge a return to a cessation of hostilities on both sides of the Blue Line, as well as an immediate recommitment to the implementation of Resolution 1701. This resolution is recognized by one and all. It sets out a path for resolving the underlying causes of the conflict and enabling the population of Lebanon and Israel to live in peace and security. International humanitarian law must be respected by all parties in all circumstances and irrespective of the lawfulness of the use of force. This includes strict compliance with the principles relating to the conduct of hostilities, such as a distinction between civilians and combatants, proportionality and precaution. Switzerland condemns all violations of international law that have taken place in recent days, including yesterday's ballistic attacks by Iran on Israel. Switzerland also condemns all violations of international humanitarian law. We also condemn all violence against civilians, such as yesterday's acts of terror in Jaffa and the increasing attacks by settlers in the West Bank. Secretary General, Switzerland reiterates its support for the UN's commitment and good office in the region. This applies in particular to UNIFIL and UNSCOL. UNIFIL, to which Switzerland contributes through UNSO, is currently working in an extremely dangerous environment so as to reduce tensions and ensure liaison between the parties. Switzerland also reiterates its full support for the work of the Secretary General. In addition, the UN, in collaboration with other organizations, is currently providing humanitarian aid to all civilians in need. We reiterate our call for the protection of UN personnel, in particular humanitarian and peacekeeping personnel. There is an urgent need to put an end to the suffering of the civilian population and to re-establish dialogue in order to bring peace to the region. The responsibility of a Security Council, united in its action for peace, is clear. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative under Rule 37. And I invite Lebanon to take the floor.
Madam President, at the outset, I congratulate you on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for this month. I also thank Slovenia for its presidency of the Council during September. I would also like to thank France for requesting to hold this emergency meeting. I would also thank the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his briefing and his calls. We express our solidarity with him and we support him and his efforts. Madam President, we gather today in your August Council as the Middle East region is burning from all sides. Lebanon is not doing well. Gaza is not doing well, as military Israeli forces and rows of battle tanks and armored vehicles are all along the southern borders of Lebanon. The Israeli government and its cabinet have ratified the ground invasion of Lebanon, which has started last night. This follows 11 months of a barbaric aggression that spared no civilians, no eyewitnesses, no aid workers, no journalists, no children, no women, and no elderly. Since the 8th of October 2023, Israel has killed and injured thousands of people in a blatant violation of UN Charter, international law, and international humanitarian law, and all international norms and humanitarian principles. Therefore, what Israel is claiming, that this is merely limited surgical military operations, this is untrue. The damages to civilians and the civilian infrastructure are immense. What took place in Ain ad-Dilb village demonstrates just that. An Israeli strike on the 29th of September targeted a residential building, causing a massacre and killing 71 victims, including dozens of women and children, all buried in a mass grave. This tragedy recalls previous Israeli massacres during its previous invasions and attacks on Lebanon, particularly the two Qana massacres of 1996 and 2006. Israel has reaffirmed time and again its utter disregard for international law, despite the calls from all members of the Security Council in general and Switzerland especially on Israel to abide by its obligations under international humanitarian law. Madam President, words and complaints have lost their meaning. How many times have we come before this Council and warned of the catastrophic situation along the southern borders? How many times have we sounded the alarm that this war could become a regional war that includes many fronts? What is happening today, this unprecedented level of killing, displacement, and destruction, this can no longer be tolerated or ignored. The policy of putting our heads in the sand and facing a confrontation with Israel is no longer useful. The children of the south and the southern suburb of Beirut are sleeping on the streets. Mothers are carrying their children, fleeing the horrors of the destructive strikes and missiles used against civilians. Israel has intensified its aggression and its crimes against Lebanon and its capital, Beirut. In one day alone, on the 23rd of September, Israel, through its aerial bombardments, killed 569 people, including 50 children and 94 women. They've also assassinated the Secretary General of Hezbollah, His Eminence Mr. Hassan Nasrallah, on the 27th of September. Across history, there was never consensus for a standard description for any military, political, or revolutionary individual. and history is rich with examples of these individuals. Your Council here today is divided over a correct description. However, there is consensus among everyone that confronting an occupying force is resistance. Madam President, as we have said time and again, and as His Excellency the Prime Minister has said in his statement before this Council last week, and as the Foreign Minister of Lebanon has repeated once and again, the people of Lebanon and the government of Lebanon reject the war. They want the implementation of Resolution 1701 with all its provisions. They want to deploy the Lebanese army in the south along our ground borders with the support of UNIFIL. This is the only solution for this blind war and this barbaric aggression. We have expressed our willingness to strengthen the presence of the army in the south, and the government has announced that it has opened the door for the enlistment of 1,500 new soldiers to comply with the implementation of Resolution 1701. In this regard, I recall that Lebanon has agreed to the French-American initiative that Israel has also initially agreed to, but then rejected this initiative, even annihilated it with a wave of killing and destruction that has been unprecedented in scale and violence. We also reaffirmed the official position as stated by the Prime Minister yesterday. We remain committed to the call issued by the American and French presidents, supported by a number of friendly and sisterly countries. We pledge to implement all the points of the declaration, including an immediate ceasefire, to start to look into the implementation of Resolution 1701 fully. We welcome the call and we pledge to implement it immediately. And upon a ceasefire, we are prepared to deploy the Lebanese army to the area south of the Litani River so that it can carry out its function fully in coordination with UNIFIL in the south. Madam President, today we are moving further and further towards an open, unrestricted regional war. The solution is to go back to political solutions based on relevant resolutions of international legitimacy. This situation will not be resolved until the full implementation of Resolution 1701. And if we only focus on imposing military solutions instead of diplomatic solutions. Furthermore, the situation in Palestine will not be resolved and will only escalate, and the waves of killing and destruction will continue unless resolutions of the United Nations are implemented, particularly resolutions 2735, 242, 338 on the two-state solutions and the establishment of the Palestinian state. The Security Council must shoulder its responsibility to prevent an implosion in the Middle East and to help us exit this dark tunnel. Madam President, Lebanon today is facing an unprecedented humanitarian crisis. Lebanon needs urgent humanitarian assistance. It is the only state that hosts 2 million Syrian IDPs, 500,000 Palestinian refugees, and we also have around 1 million Lebanese IDPs. This is an unusual precedent. We have warned before of the risk of displacement, and today we are before a humanitarian crisis with 1 million IDPs, with thousands of them on the streets, without food, without water, without medication. Therefore, we are requiring assistance to confront this catastrophe. Yesterday, in cooperation with the United Nations, we launched an urgent appeal for $426 million to respond to this humanitarian crisis. We would like to thank all those who contributed to the aid efforts, from friendly and sisterly countries, from UN agencies, and we call on all stakeholders and all countries to contribute as well. Madam President, our history with Israel has been permeated with many invasions in 1978, 1982, and 2006. And all these invasions, all these occupations that resulted in great devastation, the killing of thousands of civilians, they all ended with the defeat and withdrawal of Israel. Today's invasion will have the same result: another defeat to be added to the record of Israel with Lebanon. The land of the South recognizes its citizens, and our citizens in the South are rooted in their land. The olive tree that you burned with your white phosphorus will grow, will blossom, and bear fruit once again. And this consecrated land will reject any occupier for however long it takes. Madam President, Lebanon today is stuck between the Israeli destruction machine and the ambitions of others in the region. The Lebanese people rejects this fatal formula. Lebanon deserves life. Lebanon deserves life. Yes, Lebanon and the Lebanese people deserve life. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Lebanon, and I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Madam President. Last night, the Iranian regime launched a cold-blooded attack against 10 million civilians, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, men, women, and children of every faith. In an unprecedented act of aggression, Iran fired almost 200 ballistic missiles, forcing millions of people into bomb shelters. These scenes have not been witnessed since the Blitz in London. This was a deliberate attempt to strike at the very heart of our society, targeting the most sacred places in Israel, holy sites, mosques, synagogues, and churches. To Iran, there is no holy ground, no purity of life worth protecting. But even before the missiles rained down, the bloodshed had already begun. Just minutes before this assault, Palestinian terrorists opened fire on civilians, murdering 7 innocent people, young women, mothers protecting their babies, tourists. This is the reality we face every single day. Terror at our borders, missiles overhead, bullets in our streets. The Council must understand the situation Israel is forced to live in. We are under attack. This was not just an escalation. It was a direct assault on our very existence. The world watched silently as Iran funded and directed attacks against us for the past year, arming and training their proxies for decades, and the international community sat quiet. The silence, the routine call for de-escalation, only emboldened Iran. The result, last night's onslaught. Now the world must step up. Iran must pay a heavy price for this attack. Anything less is complicity. Do not be fooled by the fact that Israeli air defenses performed near miracles last night, saving countless lives beyond imagination. We also appreciate our partners for their assistance in defending against Iran's attack. Iran's failure does not diminish the evil behind their actions, the intentions. What we witnessed was nothing short of pure, unrestrained evil. This is the largest missile assault in Israel's history. They have openly launched hundreds of missiles into civilian areas. Today, the mask is off, and their evil is now laid bare for all the world to see. The Ayatollah's regime has revealed its true nature, not just as the world's greatest sponsor of terror, but as an active, direct aggressor. For years, Iran has armed terrorists and tyrannical regimes. We all know their weapons are responsible for the death of countless innocent civilians all across the globe, from Europe's war zones to terror attacks in the Middle East, from embassies in Latin America to assaults on US personnel. There is no corner of the world where Iran's blood-stained fingerprints cannot be found. They are not just Israel's enemy, They are an enemy of all civilized nations, an enemy to their own people who they brutally oppress, and an enemy to all nations they work to destabilize. Until now, they had largely operated in the shadows, using all their proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. They carried out their dirty work. But last night, that mask was ripped away, the mask that their leaders wear in these very halls. Iran no longer hides behind others. They have proudly stepped into the open, are the architects of chaos and destruction. And now the world can see their true face. Iran launched the largest ballistic missile attack in history, justifying it as a vengeance for the elimination of Hassan Nasrallah. That is the reason. In doing so, they relinquished any deniability and claimed full ownership over Hezbollah's actions. They say that. That is the reason for the attack, because of Nasrallah. So basically, they own the deeds of Hezbollah today. Let me remind you all. Allow me to remind you of some of Hezbollah's crimes against the world. In 1983, they bombed the United States barracks in Beirut, murdering 241 U.S. servicemen. That same year, they bombed the U.S. embassy in Beirut, murdering 63. In 1992, they bombed the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, killing 29 people and wounding 242. 2 years later, same place, Buenos Aires, they bombed the Jewish community center, murdering 85 and injuring over 300. Before 9/11, Hezbollah were responsible for more American deaths than any other terrorist organization. None of this even mentions the thousands of Lebanese people and Syrians that they brutally murdered at the altar of their tyrannical masters. In the past year alone, since October 8th, Hezbollah has launched over 9,000 missiles and rockets, over 1,000 anti-tank missiles and hundreds of attack drones. They have made over 70,000 Israeli civilians refugees in their own country. All the while, they have been attempting to infiltrate our communities, to commit an October 7th-style massacre. Behind every murder, every rocket launch, every plot stands the Iranian regime. Let me be clear. Israel will defend itself. We will act. And let me assure you, the consequences Iran will face for their actions will be far greater than they could ever have imagined. Let me ask the Council and the entire world, how would any of you react if faced with such an attack? What would any nation do if hundreds of ballistic missiles were raining down on your civilians, your cities, your places of worship? The scale of this attack is unimaginable, and yet Iran is determined to escalate further. This is not just a threat to Israel, this is a threat to the entire world. We will defend our people, and our response will be swift and decisive. Those who attack us will face serious consequences. For every missile fired, we will respond with strength. For weeks, I have sat in this Council warning of the growing threat Iran poses, urging you to take decisive action against this regime. I warned that Iran's desire for dominance would not stop at Israel's border, but the inaction of this Council has emboldened them. And now the missiles falling on Israel are the direct result of that failure to act. The time for complacency is over. The Iranian regime has shed all deniability. They are no longer silent puppet masters. They are bloodthirsty aggressors, reveling in their violence and destruction. The world cannot afford to ignore this reality any longer. We demand immediate, crippling sanctions on Iran. The IRGC must be designated as the terrorist organization it is. Do not let yourselves be fooled by moderate Iranian president. I saw the way they were received here last week. The meetings, the clapping. Iran's policy is dictated by its supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, and under his rule, the regime has grown more aggressive and murderous than ever. Iran's true face is one of terror, death, and chaos. They do not care about life, they do not respect their own religion, and they have targeted their fellow Muslims without hesitation. The time for empty calls, for de-escalation is over. How can you do that? To equate Israel, a nation simply wishing to live in peace, acting in defense of its people, with an aggressor bent on our destruction, is not just wrong. It is a grotesque and immoral distortion of reality. This is not a conflict between two equal sides. This is a battle between a sovereign country defending its right to exist and a regime that seeks nothing less than our extinction. And I repeat what I said last time. We have no border with Iran. We have no dispute with them. Ask yourself why they spend so much money and energy to build those rockets and to attack us. What is the reason behind it? Calls for de-escalation is a false symmetry, an absurd equivalence between the protector and the destroyer. Tonight actually, the Jewish people will welcome the new year. The past year has been the most challenging in our country's history, but we will prevail. In this coming year, we will not stop until all 101 hostages are back at their families' tables. Let the world understand, Israel will defend itself, and will do so with justice and strength. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Israel, and I'll give the floor to the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, we congratulate you, Madam President, for assuming the presidency of the Security Council this month, and thank you for the convening this emergency meeting to address the ongoing Israeli aggression against Lebanon and critical situation in the region. We acknowledge Slovenia for its successful conclusion of the presidency in September. Madam President, distinguished delegates, for a year now, the apartheid and occupying regime of Israel has continued its brutality in occupied Palestine with full impunity. And now this regime is extending its brutal aggressive war to Lebanon and targeting innocent people day and night across the border and deep inside the territory. The regime is pushing the region to the edge of an all-out unprecedented catastrophe. Israel has no intention to pursue peace or a ceasefire. Regrettably, the UN Security Council has remained paralyzed due to the United States' obstruction of any effective decision by this body. Unwavering support provided by the United States, United Kingdom, and certain Western states to Israel has given a carte blanche to this aggressive terrorist regime for all sorts of sinister behavior. No more than ever, this regime has become a serious threat to international peace and security. The only way to prevent further escalation is clear. Israel must immediately cease its war on Gaza, and its attacks on Lebanon must stop. Madam President, distinguished delegates, as we informed the members of the Council in our letter yesterday, the armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran launched a series of missile strikes targeting the military and security positions of the Israeli regime. Iran's action was in full accordance with the inherent right to self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter, and a direct response to the regime's repeated acts of aggression against Iran, including the violation of Iran's sovereignty and territorial integrity during the past months. Our invocation of the right of self-defense followed by an extended period of restraint reflects Iran's responsible approach to regional and international peace and security at a time when the illegal action and genocide carried out by this occupying apartheid regime against the Palestinian people, as well as its repeated military aggression against Lebanon and Syria, continue. Iran's missile strikes were a necessary and proportionate response to Israeli continued terrorist aggressive acts over the past 2 months. This includes the violation of Iran's sovereignty, the assassination of political leader of Hamas in Tehran and Iranian citizens, the targeting and wounding Iran's ambassador to Lebanon, and the recent assassination of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of the resistance and Secretary General of Hezbollah, and General Abbas Nilforoshan, an Iranian military advisor in Beirut. I wish to mention the key facts that clearly demonstrate Iran's action under self-defense is fully justified, lawful, and firmly grounded in international legal principles. On 1st April 2024, Israel presently attacked Iran's diplomatic mission in Damascus, Syria, in a blatant violation of international law, specifically the principle of inviolability of diplomatic and consular premises. Iran immediately sought the Council's condemnation. What was this body's response? Nothing. Rather than condemning Israel's act of aggression, the Council merely called for Iran's restraint and even refrained from issuing a press statement proposed by Russia. After 10 days of silence from the Security Council, Iran has no choice but to use its inherent right under international law to respond to this severe violation. On 31st July 2024, Israel committed yet another act of aggression by assassination Mr. Ismail Haniyeh, Hamas political leader and the former Prime Minister of Palestine, while he was an official guest of the Iranian government in Tehran. This was a flagrant breach of Iran's national sovereignty and territorial integrity. Despite Iran's call for action, the Council again failed to act. Meanwhile, several states, including the United States, urged Iran to maintain restraint, citing ongoing ceasefire negotiations. We respected these calls for diplomacy, yet no ceasefire materialized and Israel only grew bolder. Again, we witnessed another heinous crime by Israel, this time through the detonation of communication devices targeting the innocent people of Lebanon. A larger number of innocent civilians were killed and injured, including Iran's ambassador to Lebanon. This was yet another manifestation of state terrorism. Following, Israel carried out a blatant act of terrorist aggression using US-supplied thousands-pound bunker busters to assassinate Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, and a symbol of resistance against Israeli occupation and aggression in Lebanon. This brutal attack resulted in the martyrdom of numerous innocent people, including Hezbollah leader and Iranian General Abbas Nilforoshan, while also leaving many civilians wounded. This egregious act underscores once more the regime's continued reliance on violence and terror. Madam President, the Islamic Republic of Iran has consistently pursued peace and stability for the region and called for an immediate ceasefire and the cessation of civilians' casualties, a position we have maintained for over a year. Yet, experience has proven that Israel only understands the language of force. Diplomacy has repeatedly failed, as Israel views restraint not as a gesture of goodwill, but as a weakness to exploit. Each act of restraint taken by Iran has only emboldened Israel to commit even greater crimes and more acts of aggression. Consequently, Iran's response was necessary to restore balance and deterrence. Israel must understand that each act of aggression it makes is not unpunished and will be met with consequences. This is the cost this regime must bear. Contrary to the regime which consistently considered innocent civilians and civilian infrastructure as legitimate target for aggression and massacre, Iran's response has only targeted the regime's military and security installation with its defensive missile strike, because the Islamic Republic of Iran is grounded in ethical principles and noble teaching of Islam and full compliance with the principles of distinction on the international humanitarian law. Madam President, distinguished delegates, the international community cannot afford to remain silent. We reiterate our call on this Council to respond with urgency and determination. The Security Council must intervene to stop Israeli continued aggression and war crimes against Lebanon, Gaza, and Syria, and to prevent the situation from escalating into a full-scale regional war. Furthermore, the Security Council must force Israel to comply with its obligation on the resolution this body adopted. Israel must fully implement Resolution 1701. Finally, Madam President, we strongly warn against any further act of aggression by Israeli terrorist regime against our national security and vital interests. Iran is fully prepared to take further defensive measures if necessary to protect its legitimate interests and defend its territorial integrity and sovereignty against any act of military aggressions and the illegal use of force. In this regard, Iran will have no hesitation. In conclusion, the regime of the United States and the United Kingdom regime, notorious enablers of the Israeli regime, along with France, have once again cynically attempted to justify Israeli heinous crimes under the guise of self-defense, shifting the blame onto Iran. While the Israeli regime must be held accountable for the atrocity crimes and cannot disregard the U.S. complicity in Israel's crimes. Israel's warmongering relies on U.S. regime, military support and political backing. American weapons constitute the major part of Israeli weaponry and ammunition used in Gaza, and therefore the United States is implicated in every aspect of Israel's atrocity. The vast majority of bombs Israeli drops on Gaza and Lebanon are U.S.-made. The U.S. regime even provides Israel with jet fuel. The U.S. has sent so many arms to Israel since October 7 that the Pentagon has struggled to find sufficient cargo aircraft to deliver the materials. If there were even a shred of honesty in their concerns for the loss of innocent people lives in Gaza or Lebanon, or for the spread of war across the region, they could easily strip Israel of the tools it used to commit those atrocities, yet their actions reveal their true intent to embolden Israel's criminal actions. Thank you.
I think the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I'll now give the floor to the representative of Iraq to take the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Allow me to congratulate Switzerland on assuming the presidency of the Council this month. I wish you all success. I also thank Slovenia for its efforts as President of the Council in September. I thank France for calling for this meeting. I would also like to express my deepest gratitude to Mr. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, for his briefing. We highly value his position and his calls for a ceasefire. Madam President, holding meeting after meeting at the Security Council over the past year without achieving any tangible results to stop continued Israeli attacks against the Palestinian people reflects a painful reality, the reality that the Security Council is not making any effective or resolute decisions to stop these violations that allow the occupation to perpetuate its practices and escalate violence in the region. It is time for the Security Council to play an effective role to maintain international peace and security, especially as Israeli attacks against Palestinian and Lebanese territories persist. The Security Council must bear its primary responsibility of maintaining international peace and security according to the Charter of the United Nations. The Security Council must adopt binding resolutions to ensure an immediate ceasefire, as it did in other conflicts around the world. Failure by Security Council to play its role and to fulfill its responsibility to maintain international peace and security opens the door to Israel to persist in its violations without any real deterrent. This leads to more instability and jeopardizes regional and international peace. The international community and the Security Council in particular needs to re-evaluate its policies towards this conflict. It must take tangible steps to end the occupation and ensure the protection of civilians. Continued violations, the aggression, military expansions, all these actions by Israeli occupation forces without any deterrent pushes the region towards a wide regional confrontation, which jeopardizes regional security, causes significant human suffering, spreads extremism and terrorism, and further complicates the situation. Failure to put an end to these crimes emboldens Israel to go even further with its violations. It emboldens it to launch military attacks. This situation not only aggravates the suffering of the Palestinian and Lebanese people, it also jeopardizes stability and security in the region as a whole. In the absence of any deterrent, the conflict gets worse, and the risk of the region being dragged into a dangerous and widespread conflict increases. Due to the absence of decisive international intervention, the conflict has expanded to include Lebanon, which might lead to an all-out war in the region. Madam President, the accumulation of practices by the occupation forces over the past 75 years, the flagrant violations against the Palestinian people, the occupation of Arab territories in Syria and Lebanon, the repeated attacks, they all constitute a blatant violation of international law and international humanitarian law. These crimes, the massacres, the violence, including the recent unjust attacks on the city of Beirut that claimed the lives of thousands of Lebanese, deepen the wounds and aggravate the conflict in the region. The war has entered a very dangerous phase that portends more destruction and killing. It would exceed what we've seen in the past days as occupation forces continue with their genocidal act, with their killings that amount to war crimes and genocide. Occupation forces are disregarding international humanitarian law and human norms, acting impetuously without any deterrent. Occupation forces are trying to find false pretexts to defend the commission of those crimes. Occupation forces are committing crimes of deliberate mass killings of civilians in Gaza and Lebanon and other occupied Arab territories. These crimes are despicable. They reflect the brutality and hostile behavior of occupation forces. The international community is now before a legal, humanitarian, and moral responsibility that tests our common humanity. The international community must state that the war launched on Gaza is not an act of self-defense, as Israel claims. This claim is legally invalid. Israel took the path of vengeance and genocide. This is confirmed by the horrifying numbers of casualties, Palestinian civilians, women, children, the elderly, even UN staff and their families. This is a dangerous precedent that we've never seen before. The war on Gaza has expanded to include Lebanon. Most recently, we've witnessed an unjust attack that led to the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah and other resistance figures. The war can further expand to include other countries in the region. This is a threat to the stability of the Middle East as a whole. This scenario can have grave repercussions that go beyond the borders of local conflicts. We might be seeing a wider escalation that includes mutual attacks, which would be a serious threat to international and regional stability, especially if other regional powers joined this equation, which would invite interventions, international interventions that would further complicate the situation, that would jeopardize political and social stability, that would aggravate humanitarian crisis, that would lead to mass displacement, that would lead to an increase in the number of refugees and IDPs, that would increase the pressure on neighboring countries, even European countries. Such developments would also have negative economic consequences, as economic activities would be disrupted, poverty and unemployment rates would surge. Such tensions would lead to an increase in oil prices if maritime navigation routes and energy sources were affected. Madam President, Iraq condemned statements and threats by the Prime Minister of the Israeli Occupation Authority against countries of the region. Such escalatory statements fuel conflicts and push the region towards more tension and war. Such public threats are not only provocative, they also constitute a clear violation to the principles of international law and the United Nations Charter, which prescribe the threat of use of force against sovereign states. In conclusion, Madam President, Iraq expresses its full solidarity with the just cause of the Palestinian people. We strongly support its aspirations to be granted its rights to establish an independent state, with Al-Quds Sharif as its capital. Iraq expresses its support and solidarity with the government and people of Lebanon against the barbaric attacks that violate the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Lebanon. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Iraq for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, allow me at the outset to congratulate you on your assumption of the presidency of the Security Council this month. I thank your predecessor for conducting the work of the Security Council last month. I would also like to thank the Secretary General of the United Nations for participating and being with us today in this session. We stand in solidarity with him in the face of the Israeli campaigns against him. Madam President, for the past months, the Security Council held successive sessions to discuss the continued Israeli aggression on the Palestinian people and on the countries of our region. We would not have gotten here, we would not be holding this emergency session and maybe other sessions in the next days had your council shouldered its main responsibility in the maintenance of international peace and security since the beginning of the barbaric Israeli aggression on Gaza. The majority of leaders and representatives of member states who spoke at the General Assembly in the past few days during the high-level general debate, they called upon the Security Council to take immediate action to stop the barbaric Israeli aggression on the Palestinian people and to stop the repeated Israeli attacks on the states of the region, to implement its resolutions to end the Israeli occupation of Arab-occupied territories, to stop its continued crimes which started decades ago. Their statements reflected a genuine international will to put an end to the impunity of the Israeli occupation entity and its obsession with war and bloodshed. All these calls were met by Israeli war criminals continuing their criminal aggression in Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon, showing off their violations of international law and the UN Charter. They have been leveling accusations against our organization and trying to terrorize its representatives and agencies, including UNRWA. We meet today as our region is on the brink of an all-out destructive war that can spare no one. It is no longer acceptable for the Security Council response to be limited to holding session after session without adopting any product that could lead to a serious and tangible action. To be more specific, the reluctance of the United States to stop this Israeli madness, but rather supporting and encouraging it, while preventing the Security Council to shoulder its responsibility, namely to maintain international peace and security, is what got us to this dangerous situation. The U.S. administration cannot deny its responsibility by making statements to express concern, or warning against dangerous escalation, or calling for restraint. At a time when it continues to provide unlimited, multifaceted support to the Israeli occupation entity, vowing to protect it from accountability and ensuring its impunity. Madam President, it was not enough for the Israeli occupation authorities to see the tens of thousands of lives they have killed, to see the bloodshed, to see the infrastructure they destroyed in occupied Palestine. They continued the escalation in the region, pushing it towards a full-on war by continuing their attacks on the states of the region, including my country, Syria. The Israeli occupation forces launched repeated attacks targeting civilians in safe areas, targeting civilian infrastructure and residential buildings, even targeting diplomatic premises. The latest attack on Monday targeted a number of safe residential neighborhoods and regions in Damascus with drones and airstrikes, killing 3 civilians, including 1 journalist, and injuring 7 others, while also causing tremendous property damage. A few minutes ago, another Israeli aggression targeted a residential building in Damascus, leading to the killing of 3 people and injuring others. Those are the preliminary numbers. In brotherly Lebanon, the criminal occupation authorities used civilian communication equipment to conduct mass killing. And then they mobilized their forces in preparation of an incursion. They targeted a number of residential buildings in the southern suburb of Beirut in order to assassinate the Secretary General of Hezbollah, who led an honorable Lebanese national resistance against the Israeli occupation. All these different forms of the barbaric Israeli occupation on our region were also perpetrated during the General Assembly, during the high-level week of the General Assembly, which reflects Israel's contempt for our organization and the cause of its member states. The so-called Israeli Prime Minister boasted about taking the decision of attacking the southern Beirut suburb from here in New York, following a propaganda campaign full of misleading lies that he launched during his statement, while the majority of delegations refused to listen to him.
him. The Syrian Arab Republic condemns all the continued Israeli aggression on the states of the region. We call upon the Security Council to take immediate action to put an end to the Israeli impunity, which is setting the region on fire, which is threatening international and regional peace and security. We reaffirm our legitimate right to defend our people and land, to fight these crimes with all the means guaranteed by the international law. We also reaffirm that we stand with the Palestinian and Lebanese people. We fully support them despite the grave challenges facing Syria caused by the aggressive policies adopted by Western states in service of Israel, and despite the illegitimate coercive measures and inhumane blockade imposed on Syria, Syria will spare no effort to provide humanitarian assistance to our brothers and sisters in Lebanon. We have mobilized as a government and civil society all our energy and resources to help all those coming from Lebanon, be they Syrian, Lebanese, or from other nationalities. Madam President, Article 51 of the Charter stipulated the legitimate right of states to self-defense. This is an inherent right for people and states, and the Israeli occupation entity does not have it. This was stressed by the ICJ because occupation and the aggression it represents is the basic crime which deprives its perpetrators from any rights. The inaction of the Security Council allowed the Israeli occupation entity to cross all red lines, pushing the Islamic Republic of Iran to practice its legitimate right to self-defense based on Article 51 of the Charter in response to the aggression of the Israeli occupation entity. The Iranian response came after a long period of self-restraint and attempts to prevent further escalation. The Iranian response was limited to military and security facilities. This stresses Iran's responsible approach regarding international and regional peace and security. We were not surprised to hear the representative of the U.S. administration and a number of her alliances criticize the Iranian response. These states look at the Charter as a tool that they use at their own whims to target their foes and protect their partners. We have listened time and again to the representatives of successive U.S. administrations presenting false and distorted interpretations of Article 51 of the Charter to justify aggression on states that are thousands and thousands of miles away, to occupy their land, to loot their resources under the pretext of quote-unquote protecting or maintaining national U.S. security or fighting terrorism, while prohibiting other states from practicing their legitimate right to self-defense at their immediate borders in the face of a genuine aggression against them. In conclusion, Madam President, the representatives of member states who took the floor and spoke at the General Assembly in the last few days have spoken. It is now high time for the Security Council to listen, to take urgent and serious steps to stop the continuing suffering in Gaza, to stop the bloodshed in the region, to put an immediate and unconditional end to the Israeli aggression on Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon, to stop and end the Israeli occupation of Arab territories by implementing the relevant Security Council resolutions. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic, and I give the floor to the representative of Italy.
Madam President, let me first congratulate you for assuming the presidency in this month of October, and also to thank the Secretary General for his briefing and his work. Italy firmly condemns yesterday's Iranian missile attack on Israel. We express deep concern for the ongoing developments and call for restraint and responsibility on all regional actors. Avoiding any further spiral of escalations has to be our common priority, our top priority, as well as preventing another dramatic humanitarian outburst. Italy will continue to work for a diplomatic solution, also in its capacity as the G7 rotating president, for the stabilization of the Israeli-Lebanese border, and in this regard strongly recalls the leaders' declaration of September 25 for a 21-day ceasefire in Lebanon. And while we are gathering now, our Prime Minister is about to host a call of the leaders of the G7 to discuss the situation in the region. Italy calls on all parties involved for the full implementation of Resolution 1701 and invites the Security Council to consider to make the implementation of UNIFIL's mandate more effective, with a view to ensure the security along the Blue Line and to grant the displaced population of northern Israel and Lebanon to safely return home. The security of all UNIFIL's personnel has to be respected and fully guaranteed. Sovereignty and territorial integrity of Lebanon needs also to be respected. Madam President, Italy calls for an immediate ceasefire in Lebanon. We will continue to work for a diplomatic solution, and we are ready to assist the Lebanese armed forces in assuming their responsibilities along the border with Israel. To such extent, Italy also deems of utmost importance to fully support and revamp the Lebanon-Israel negotiations to peacefully establish their borders. We will continue to engage with our partners and allies and to keep open channels of dialogue with all the actors in the region. At the same time, it is equally urgent to reach an agreement for a ceasefire in Gaza and to release the hostages in line with Resolution 2735. At this specific time, it is our collective responsibility to call for calm and restraint, aware of the fact that every minute that goes by, the lives of innocent men, women, and children of the entire region hang in the balance. Italy is a firm supporter of the principle two peoples, two states, and shares the goal of a comprehensive, lasting regional peace that can ultimately be achieved on the basis of a two-state solution, with Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and security within agreed, recognized borders, and full recognition of Israel's existence and respect of its security by all regional actors. I thank you.
Merci, le représentant d'Italie.
I thank the representative of Italy. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I would like to warmly thank the Secretary General, and I now invite members of the Council to informal consultations on the subject. The meeting is adjourned.